Welcome into Backstretch Banter on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio Channel 90. I'm Chris Childers, Kevin Woods, alongside today from RFK Racing. We have a very special guest, somebody we're excited to hang out with. Greg Biffle is with us, former driver for Rous Racing, and he's been in the headlines for a lot of good reasons lately. Greg Biffle, great to have you, man. Welcome into the show. How are you?
I'm good. It's been some time, but here I am, and I'm excited to be here.
So I'm curious for guys that come back and that haven't been in that building in a long, long time. And we had Jamie in last week who was like, it's just so weird. I have all these memories rushing back, just sitting here talking. You just walked in the building. So we have had like 5 seconds to see each other, to say hello. What is happening in your mind being back in the Rous Fenway building?
Well, it's funny. I find myself wandering around in the museum area down there looking at, pictures and cars and all that stuff. And it's just, when you're in the moment, you can't appreciate it. It's not till later on till you walk through and see all the neat stuff, And I was looking at Jack's, Gap and Rous, drag racing days and those kinds of things. And Mark's, in the very beginning, it's so cool to see all that stuff. Because when you're there every day and it's your job and you're driving the car and you're working and you're doing all the things, you just don't get a chance to take it in. So it's cool to come back and see it.
Really cool, I would imagine. And it kind of, you can go back down memory lane and say, I remember where I was and what I did here and what happened that day and the conversations with Jack and your crew chief and whoever, I'm sure. Is there a memory that immediately popped out when you were walking through the museum? You're like, oh man, maybe you forgot or you haven't thought about it in a while. Was there one? I could see you smiling. Was there one that's coming to mind?
Yeah. So as soon as I came in the door and kind of rounded off to the right, I look up at the kind of radiused wall, and there's a picture of Jack and I with the championship truck series trophy.
Yeah.
And so, that was the first memory, as I walked in the building and I see that, and I remember it, pretty clearly. It was a fun time. We celebrated out in Phoenix, and that was good memories, good times.
Great times, I'm sure. You were responsible, I think, for Jack's first 2 championships, which is a pretty cool deal, and I'm sure Jack will forever hold you in high reverence. We got a lot to talk about, and certainly you have done some incredible things here recently that I would love to get your take on, just how and why and all those things that happened with the hurricane. But to be Jack's first, that's got to be cool. I mean, there's so much history in the building. There's so much history with the team. Having a chance to think about that and reflect, is that kind of cool to be responsible for those first 2 championships?
It really is. You feel good about it, that you can contribute to the legacy of RFK, and it's fun to look back and see those things. It was special at the time. It's still special today. And, I just wished, you always think about those first 2. You always think about the third, right?
Uh-huh.
And missing it by that much. But it is special to have those first 2 championships for Jack. And was excited to see, Kurt and Matt and all those guys put championships up. So that was it was fun times.
How many points out were you on the third one? I don't remember.
The third one,
I know you were second.
I was second by 35 points.
Oh,
but
wow.
To put it in context of today's terms, that was 5 points per position. So it was only 7 finishing positions out of 10 races. So it was the combination of 10 races. I only needed 6 finishing positions at any one of the 10. So that's the real
you were
bite.
very close. You were very close.
So in today's terms, 6 points. But again, it doesn't. We do it differently where you get down to the final 4. But interestingly enough, I went into Homestead top 4 in points twice, and won both times.
Right. Yep.
So under today's rules, I would have 2 titles. The way that the points work today. And it's funny, every rule iteration from that point forward, I'd at least have 1 or 2. Because the following year, they gave points for wins. They gave more bonus points for wins. That year, I had 6 wins. So that alone would have got me the championship. So it's a bittersweet, to go back and think about it. So, but look, we had great time and won a lot of races and had a lot of fun.
Since you brought that up, let's talk about that time real quick. I mean, because I know one of those races, what were you and Mark inches apart, right?
Yes, that was the 2005.
And you won 6, you said yourself, and really we'd go to races then, and somebody was going to win it. It was a crazy time, right?
It was crazy. It was one of the 5 cars. I mean, and all 5 of us were in the chase. That's it's just unheard of. To have those kinds of stats, and it just goes to show how this organization was, and to have half of the field in the championship hunt is pretty incredible to be there. So I know
really
it'll never
incredible.
happen. I know it'll never happen again.
Yes.
And the reason why is because they don't have 5 anymore. Now
changed the rules on us.
now the teams have 4 teams. So
Yep.
So anyway.
It was cool. And Rous Racing at the time, and now Rous Fenway Kozlowski was just so dominant. I mean, you were there when we were talking to Jamie McMurray about it last week. He's like, we were really good. I'm not sure how much fun was being had behind the scenes. It was kind of hardcore, and Jack was hardcore. How would you describe the atmosphere? Was it kind of military-esque, or could you still smile amongst the fierce competition in the garage?
Well, I look at it. It's sort of both, right? And it wasn't necessarily competition in the garage. It was competition within the organization, right? So we were all so good. It's like you don't want to share all of your information with Mark Martin or Matt Kenseth or Jamie McMurray. We're going to share most of it, but there's those little things that you do different. The crew chief mostly, okay? The crew chief or the aero guy. And I will tell you, we had more freedom then to sort of explore. And Jack encouraged that because, and I get the point, we didn't have the simulation that we do today. So simulation happened at the racetrack. That's where we gained our information. If he sends 5 cars to the track, slightly different in iterations, you're gonna get a result, and then you can hone in on, okay, what did this car do? What did that car do? What did that car do? So you're able to sort of test every race, every practice. If everybody was exactly the same, you're either going to be all off a little bit or all right on, and so. I think Jack encouraged that, and he also felt that every driver was slightly different. Mark Martin definitely wanted a little bit different feel than I did, as then did Matt or maybe Jamie. So that's Jack gave us that freedom to sort of go down those roads, and I remember that. So it was a competition. Who has the best mousetrap between the five teams this week, next week, week after?
Let me expand on that real quick because Jamie was in here last week, and Jamie, we talked about, because Jamie, if you remember, was kind of the first one that we kind of went out and got outside. So he really wasn't in that mold.
Right.
Where I would say you were the prototypical mold. They brought you in trucks. You worked your way up through trucks. You worked your way up through Busch Series. You worked your way up through Cup. Hell, I think you had the same team practically in all 3 series. So you're completely opposite. So I think the culture, the way Jamie would describe it and the way you would describe it, completely different. But, looking at it from that way, being embedded in it, you kind of see it a completely different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, and I think Jamie struggled a little bit with that. It from the fact that I'm not saying other teams had more organization, but other teams maybe had more of a plan or more of a setup or more. The driver wasn't as influential as he was at Roush Fenway. And so, I think that, with that experience that we had and that close relationship with the teams and all the engineers, maybe gave us an advantage over Jamie coming in and being, maybe under a different circumstance, a different team. It's whether it's right or wrong is sort of the way our culture was and the way our teams were.
How protective was the culture? How I feel like everybody's kind of described it in a certain way, and there was sort of it was great, it was competitive, the results were high, but there was kind of this protection of we are, Roush's guys. Was that a real, what was that really like to live?
I think so. I mean, we don't want our competition to get any of our information. Mm-hmm. We're very particular about how we kept it close to the vest. And, I think it's similar today but it's just different today that the computer spits out really the kind of the base formula, if you will, where back then it didn't. And so that base formula was highly regarded and protected, so to speak, when it came to, and technology is changing so quickly then. We're starting to figure out getting the cars down on the racetrack. We're starting to figure out more body and aero things were coming, much quicker than they were. And the technology was starting to creep in to that. I remember Childress, I think, was one of the first teams with a 7-post rig. And, they struggled for years with it. And, we kind of sat over here and giggled a little bit about it, that, it's not helping them. And so, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And so some of those situations may have got us behind in the fact that once they did figure it out, they did struggle for 2 or 3 years or more. But once they did figure it out, now it was time for us to have that struggle, right? To try and correlate what we're learning to the racetrack. So it's and if you have a tremendous amount, I believe this, if you have a tremendous amount of success and win races and kind of all that you're doing, it's easier to get behind because you don't need, or you're not innovating as fast as you probably need to, because you're already winning. And if you're winning and you're beating everybody's ass, then why do we need to try and unturn every rock that we can to try and figure out how to be better, so to speak, if you will. Sure. And so it's easy to get behind when you're having the success that we did.
And I was going to say the culture is funny because you speak kind of with pride to it now that everybody, but it really wasn't that way. Like I can remember the maddest I'd see Mark was when you won your first race at Daytona, and I remember he came on the red and he was like, "All right, guys, didn't work out for us," and the crew chief was like, "Yeah, go congratulate Greg, he got his win." What? And it was like, you guys, you went to the track to win the race, not to. And I was laughing this week because we're talking about the manufacturer. I watched you guys one night in the Bud Shootout finish 3 wide for second place, which is a non-points race. There's no like literally because all of you is trying to win the race, and that's kind of was the predominant theme here. You went to the race to win for Greg Biffle to win.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that was the culture Jack instilled in us is it was win for yourself first, and if you can't win, help your teammate or help your fellow Ford competitor, right? But it's win first, and if you can't win, then we need to be looking at helping our teammates.
Greg Biffle with us today on Backstretch Banter with RFK Racing, Chris Childers and Kevin Woods. Let's take a break. We'll get back to the Roush days in a little bit, but you have done a lot of good lately for a lot of people. The hurricanes came, Hurricane Helene, and you'll talk about it. We'll get into it when we come back right here on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. We're back on Backstretch Banner, SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, Channel 90. I'm Chris Childers. Kevin Woods from RFK is hanging out. We got Greg Biffle today, our guest, former Roush driver who made a lot of news here recently just for being a good person, just for being a good Samaritan and helping a lot of people that were in a tough situation. Everybody knows about the weather situations we had earlier this fall, and the hurricanes. Hurricane Helene just wreaked havoc in and around North Carolina. And Greg decided to do something about it to help his fellow man and to be somebody that took action and said, I have resources. Let me use those resources for good. Greg, it looked unbelievable for those that were just watching on television. I cannot imagine what it was like to be in and around the devastation. But you were supposed to be on this show. We had you booked that Tuesday, and then all of a sudden the weather happens and you're, out helping everybody, and we ended up delaying until today. But let's just start from the beginning. When the weather, we all knew it was going to happen. Everybody was saying the hurricane's coming. The devastation was brutal and beyond what anybody thought. I remember looking at pictures of the Biltmore and Asheville and, beautiful place and saying, where did it go? With that said, you decided to take action. Why? How? I mean, give us the background.
Well, I will tell you, I'm still blown away by the amount of devastation that is up there. And I think it's, and not for any particular reason, I just think it's still today so underreported because you can't really see it. We could see Hurricane Katrina. Helicopter flew over. We could see all the homes flooded. We can't really see the scale of the event. And, when was the last time we had a hurricane in the mountains? It's just the formula doesn't add up. Yeah. And the other thing, so the way it started is I was at my shop Saturday morning working on a small skiff, and I was getting ready to go, fishing for about 7 days or something, go on a trip. And a friend of mine texted me, "Do you want to go flying today?" with a question mark and a link to a Facebook post that there was a family stuck up in Banter Elk and couldn't get out. We're in an Airbnb, so they didn't have a lot of food and supplies in the pantry like most people did.
Sure, yeah.
And they were out of diapers, out of formula, power's out, need to get out. And I knew that at that point in time, I knew that some power was out. I knew there were some trees down or damaged, but I thought, I hadn't really heard about it on the news or anywhere else that there's this much devastation. So I thought to myself, well, I can delay my trip for a day, and I'll go up and give it a try. I've got a helicopter. It's at the airport, and I'll get a safety pilot to go with me because the weather wasn't great.
Yeah.
And I hadn't been mountain flying all that much, so I decided to go. And I called the airport. The power's out. So the guys opened the hangar door with the tug, and I got my helicopter out, got it fueled, went to Lincolnton, picked up a guy that, came recommended, friend of a friend that didn't really have any Robinson time, but he was a helicopter pilot. So we made the trek up the first day and couldn't get there. We got within about 9 miles. And the weather had us socked in over the mountains, and I was trying to scud run and get in there, and I said, man, I don't want to be the guy that everybody else is reading about in the paper.
Sure.
And I just couldn't get in there. So we turned around and came back, and my route of flight was Statesville up to that area. So it didn't take me, near Asheville or any of those other areas, but we could see all the flooding and all of the canyons washed out and trees down. Well, I did post on social media in case other people were going to try and go up and rescue the people that, hey, I'm going to go. And, and when I got back, I said, couldn't make it, tried. And within that 2-hour period, I got about 4,000 messages.
Oh, wow.
Of, I can't get in touch with my neighbors, my friends, my parents, my grandparents, my kids, my anything. So at that point, we realized that communications cut off everywhere. Power's out everywhere. And suddenly we started realizing that the damage was, so widespread. And I don't think I still know today. So what I thought was helping one family turned out to be a crisis that was on a scale that no one even imagined. And so the next morning, there was 8 helicopters that joined the effort. There's 25 people at the airport. There's a line of cars a quarter mile long of people dropping supplies off. And so now all of a sudden we're flying in to these areas up in the mountains. And, you think about a small amount of people cut off. Well, think about from here all the way to the North Carolina coast. And every side road and every main road is washed out. Mm-hmm. There's trees down. You think about a quarter mile of road, there's probably 50 trees down across it. So you get once you get the 50 trees cleared, then the bridge is gone. Then the road on on down the canyon's gone. And so large communities, not the ones that got flooded, of course, but now they're just isolated and don't have any power. So it was incredible. And we were flying in supplies and insulin and medical things. So it went from 8 helicopters, the end of the day, maybe 20, the next day, probably 35. And we got up to about 90 helicopters flying in supplies in about a 4-day period. And so it took on something I've never seen before from, just people helping people. And it was, and the stuff we saw is just, I can't even put it in words. There's piles of brush half the size of this building in the corners and bridge abutments, and there's cars and trucks and houses and propane tanks and Connex containers and RVs in the brush, in the, buried all along this thing. It's just amazing to see from the air. We're very fortunate, to be able to fly it with a helicopter for 11 days straight.
The only thing I'd say, having been up there just a little bit, is that you kind of did expand on there, is the scale. You can't, like when you say there's trees down in your head, you think, we're talking trees with root balls as big as this room.
Yeah.
Floating, and bedded up against bridges, and it's crazy, the damage.
This stuff, and everywhere you went to Avery, and then you went to, Green Mountain, and then Swannanoa, Old Fort. It's just, and here's a talk about the scale for a second. I have a small river rock mine in right outside of Wytheville, Virginia. Okay, that's a long ways from here. It wiped out my bridge. My D9 was underwater.
Really?
My stationary screen plant. It affected there, right? So there's damage. We're not even talking about that. There's damage in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So it absolutely, from South Carolina to Virginia, all through that entire way, hundreds of miles this way, several hundred miles that way, every road, every bridge, and power lines just snapped off like toothpicks. They say some of those places aren't going to have power for 3 to 5 months. It's snowing up there now. There's a huge problem for these folks. So the other thing I started thinking about the other day is, what are they going to do for their job? The local place, the local, gas station or whatever else is not really there anymore, not really functioning at capacity. And so these people's lives are changed pretty dramatically. So, getting them shelter, getting them back on the road is the most important. And I think we did a good job at getting all those supplies in there quickly.
We talk a lot of racing on this show, but you obviously saw this, you were a part of it, you helped a lot of people that needed it, and so we might as well get a little deeper here, because I really think it's incredible, just Mother Nature and the power. I mean, I think you saw it firsthand, and you can describe it to us. Most of us live our normal lives and everything's fine, and we don't realize that in a moment's notice, whenever Mother Nature decides, the world can change significantly. And you saw that power up close, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And, flying these canyons and no resemblance of a roadbed on either side of the road, right? Not a little sliver of pavement for miles. And it's like, how are you going to fix that? Not only how are you going to fix that, but how are you going to fix that times 1,000 or 300 or 400 or whatever? People hiking out, down in these canyons. I could see people walking out. You can see people that didn't make it. And we go down in some of these areas and land, and I had a Starlink in my helicopter. So I get my Starlink out, set it up, and there's 15, 20 people around this area that all of a sudden their phone just starts da-ding, 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 because they connect to the Starlink. And they're calling their loved ones. They're calling their parents, their friends, their neighbors. They haven't heard from them in 3 days. They have no idea whether they're alive or not.
Yeah.
And, it's just the amount of messages I got and welfare checks and, can you check on my parents? I haven't heard from them in 4 days now. And they give us an address. And so after we make a drop of supplies, I fly that address and we fly over it and we're looking down, and it's hard to, figure out where you're going in the air from an address. But we had a pretty good idea, and we see them. Yeah. And there's her dad on the back porch sitting in a recliner,
Oh, really?
Like, okay, well, he's good,
He's good, yeah.
So we're able to report back good stories, but she hadn't heard from him. And so, the Starlink story is really good. I have a friend that's on the board of Polaris, a CFO, and one of their board members is on the board of SpaceX. And they got us 300 Starlink units. About 4 p.m. this started.
That's awesome.
They were at my shop at 5:30 the next morning. Wow. We unloaded them, loaded them on my truck and trailer, took them to the airport, and started flying them out right after daylight in helicopters and deploying them, the 300 units, getting them out to, all these stranded or abandoned areas, or whatever you want to say, that can't communicate. So it was pretty neat. And then the companies just started coming out of the woodwork. Husqvarna and, Garment Tactical sending us supplies and boots. And, it's still going on, right? It's pretty amazing to see. And because, it keeps changing what people need, right? So sure. We're still doing it. Now we're on kind of a ground game. And we're taking supplies up there that are getting delivered to the warehouse. So.
Unbelievable. I mean, just really the experience, what happened, the impact of Mother Nature, the fact that we have technology like Starlink now that can get people to say, okay, I'm fine, Mom, I'm okay. Like, you don't have to, that's a big deal. We got to break in a second, but I do want to, before I forget to bring that up, when you set those things up and their phones started pinging, how emotional were those moments that you witnessed when they actually talked to that loved one for the first time?
Yeah, I had to do like the little walk around the thing, because it is tough to see. They're crying or mom's crying on the other end or neighbor, because that was the moment they knew that they were still alive, right? Yeah. And they're telling them that their next neighbor down is not so fortunate. They got swept away and they're gone, so it's not all the calls were great, that, some people just didn't make it. And, it was really tough, and we could see things from the air as well, as you can imagine, along those creeks and banks, with the stuff embedded in the brush and all that, it went through there like a freight train. People that saw it said that the water started rising and rising and rising. And then they said a wall of water came down the canyon 15 feet high. And then they said about 10 minutes later, another wall of water came down the canyon about 15 foot high.
Oh, my.
And they said about 20 minutes later, it did it again. And so you can see debris, household goods, supplies, materials. It's about 60 feet up in the trees. Blankets, blankets, stuff. So the road, or think about the mountain. So it's in a big V, right? It rains 30 inches. All that water goes straight to the bottom. Mm-hmm. And it fills that V up very high because it doesn't have anywhere to spread out like Florida, right? And so, the road is 60 feet underwater, down through that canyon. And it mowed down everything in its path, absolutely everything in its path. So that's, it's just crazy to see, crazy to think that could happen. And obviously it could happen very easily. Yeah. But it just never has.
It's unbelievable, Kevin. I mean, really, I'm sitting here and I'm just like speechless because it really happened. Like that, all that's real. Like everything he saw was real, and real people were involved, and families and elderly people and babies, and it's just it's unbelievable.
I guess I'd ask you real quick, because you couldn't have been prepared for that mentally when you first went that way. Like at what point in time does it hit, like this is so real? Like it had to be something different than anything you'd ever seen.
Yeah, and I think what was astonishing is, to just take it in the first 3 days, and then day 4, day 5, day 6, as I'm going, to these other areas, and they're like, oh man, this little Switzerland is really, that place got hit really hard. And I'm like, harder than this? So you go there, and sure enough, it's the same. And then, it's the same over there, and it's the same down there. And I stopped, I landed in the riverbed, because the river now is, 200 some feet wide, and all this gravel's exposed. So I land in the riverbed, and we walk over there, and half this bridge is gone, and they've got some wood pilings that they're walking across. And they're like, that field over there, those were all houses, and a volunteer fire department was there. Typically there's a sign of something, but it is just looked like a beautiful field. With nothing in it. And, unfortunately, they're underneath the bridge with cadaver dogs, and yellow tape out. And, and unfortunately, it's happening there. They're finding people and, trying to get them out. The other good story was that next day we landed with one of my old teammates, Dex. I landed and gave them a Starlink. And we were right on the edge of the riverbank. And, again, big clump of trees, the size of a house against, kind of against the riverbank. They said the next day or that afternoon, I don't remember, they found someone alive.
Oh, wow.
In that brush pile.
Really?
And that was day 8.
Wow.
Been in the brush pile for 8 days.
Can you imagine? Wow.
And it gave me, I was happy but frustrated at the same time, that to think about how many people,
who knows who else?
Or who else is there? He made it 8 days, which is really unusual. But, you think about how many more are there, and we're not even looking for them. Right?
Sure.
We're trying to, just get supplies and things, and obviously search and rescue. There are some search and rescue, but most of it was private. And doing, going down the canyon. So it was It was crazy to see, crazy to even comprehend.
Honestly, I can't even imagine what you saw and how it happened day after day after day. Let's break. We got more with the great Greg Biffle when we come back here. Wow. I don't even know what else to say to what you just told us. We got more coming up on Backstretch Banter. We're back here. It is Backstretch Banter, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio with RFK, Rous, Fenway, Keselowski Racing. We are going into our final race in Phoenix this weekend. Brad Keselowski will be driving the BuildSubmarines.com Ford Mustang in the number 6. And good old Fastenal will be on the car for Chris Buescher, number 17. Fastenal and the 17 go together like peanut butter and jelly. Both guys have had success at this track. Buescher has had an average finish of 3.5. He has been in the top 5 the last 2 Phoenix races, including P2 this spring and P5 last fall. So it would be very cool on Championship Sunday to see somebody not going for the title named Chris Buescher in Victory Lane. Greg Biffle is with us. We just talked really quite at length, and it was quite moving what he had to say about the things that he saw with the hurricane and the effort to help a lot of people. I can't even imagine what it was like, and these people that were, just living normal lives like all the rest of us, and now their jobs are gone, their homes are gone, everything is gone. It's just, crazy. But let's talk some racing. Let's get back to what's going on in the world of racing as we go to Phoenix. When you look at NASCAR right now, you mentioned earlier how it's evolved over the years. Do you think the sport's in a good spot from a technology standpoint, from a competition standpoint? How would you, from your perspective as a guy who's lived it, view the sport right now?
I think they're in a good spot for competition and a level of fairness and equal, throughout the teams and organizations. This new car has leveled the playing field. We like to use that term, but I think that it's helped some of the teams. It looks like it's hurt some of the teams, and it shifted the ball around a little bit. But overall, I watch these races, and it looks like they're putting on good races to me. And I feel like the competition is pretty competitive, pretty fierce, like it always has been. So, and I see NASCAR in tough positions to have to make calls like, riding the wall and other things that are impacting the sport heavily. And, that's I think there's been a couple throughout this format for the championship that has, been tough calls for them.
Kev?
Do you find it, when it comes to the format, do you find it kind of ironic that you have all these people that complain, like so-and-so has more, and literally, what Matt wrapped the thing up with about 3 weeks to go? Like, would they really be happier if in August this thing was narrowed down to 2 people?
It's sort of, I look at it, and everybody has their own view, right? I like the traditional point system where you're rewarded for your good days and your bad days. What I dislike about the system now, and maybe not, we reverted all the way back to when Matt had the championship, won 3 races to go, but you have to be accountable for your bad days, right? So win and you're in, and it doesn't matter what happens. I don't necessarily think that's a good thing from the fact that from an athlete or a team or organization, you have to be good at every single track. And part of what we did when we raced was, and Jack instilled in us and in our team and our crew chiefs and everything, is make the best out of a bad day. Right? Because everybody has bad days. Now, you've got to recover from that and get the best finish you can. And so that's sort of a little bit out the window in this format is, obviously not the guys that need to make it to the next one on points, because not everybody wins, right? But win and you're automatically guaranteed into the next. Maybe that's okay, but there are more instances now that your bad day doesn't really count against you, so to speak, or your off day, or you made a mistake or something like that. We need to be graded on every race somehow.
Makes sense.
So that's sort of my view. I like the competition. I like the way it's going. I don't like how we get down to Phoenix. I watch the race, and all they talk about is 4 guys.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really care for that because
I don't either.
There's 40 guys out there competing for all kinds of points positions, but we get down to talking about 4 guys. And I understand that's the championship and that's the game, but it feels different to me just as a viewer.
Do you think there's...
Totally agree with that. I brought that up recently as well. It's just kind of wild that you have, 36 other cars that are in the championship race that have no chance to win the championship, but it just kind of feels a little, but everybody's only focused on those four. It does have a weird feel to it, and I think there might be a better way to do it. I don't disagree with that at all. Greg Biffle is our guest here, Sirius XM, NASCAR Radio, Backstretch Banter with RFK. Some quick thank yous, then we'll take our break and come back and wrap it up. I want to thank Brandon Lee for helping us out, put everything on, Thomas Burfield, Elijah Burke, outstanding, and our producer back in D.C., Alec Walt. Let's break. We'll finish up with Greg Biffle when we come back on Backstretch Banter with RFK. We're back here on Backstretch Banter, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio, Channel 90. I'm your host, Chris Childers. Kevin Woods with me again today from RFK. We have had a really interesting show hanging out with Greg Biffle. We talked NASCAR. We talked some real life stuff that happened with the Hurricanes, and it's been one of the more interesting and fascinating episodes we've ever had. I've enjoyed it, I'll tell you that. It's been great to hang out with Greg for an hour. We got a few minutes left to go, and I know Kevin's had something he's been eager to bring up from Rous days gone by. So go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, well, we'll move past the points. I got a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. So when I first got here, I remember I went to a Christmas party, and Jeff Smith, who was on this, he was on this show earlier. Believe it or not, we had Jeff in here. He did like a 10-minute soliloquy on how proud he was for you for having punched Jay Sauter in a race. So I got a couple of these things we're going to talk about. So talk about what happened in that race. And why did that make them so happy?
Well, I think that we didn't want to get Roush Fenway. We didn't want to get railroaded, so to speak, right? In racing or whatever you want to say, right? They wanted the tough guy or whatever that was, and they didn't think Mark was probably going to punch anybody. But coming off turn 2, we're at Richmond. I got in the back of Jay Sauter. He got loose, and you know how it is. He lifted on the throttle slightly, and I got into him. You know that happens, and he got wrecked. Well, then he comes back out, rides around slow, waits for me, and wrecks me coming off turn 4 on purpose. And it flipped my switch. I just was that didn't sit well with me. And so I went over to have a talk with him. I don't think I went over to have a talk with him. I went over to talk with my hands, and I punched him sitting in the car, and then figured I better walk off. And I'll tell you what, I'm glad that I didn't really calm down, but I'm glad I calmed down because I was ready to whip his ass over at the Infield Care Center. I was about to climb the fence. There was a 6-foot chain link fence to get in over because I knew he was on the other side, and I was more furious then, I think, that I had time to think about it because I was trying to win a championship. And, and not like today, those points count all year long. So that wreck counts towards the championship at the end of the season. So that very well could have been the championship for me. And I do remember Jeff Smith was very proud of that moment that one of our drivers stood up for himself.
And it's funny you bring it up that way because, that's the early 2000s. And although it became dominant, at this point in time, this organization's still fighting for respect. Jack's still an outsider from up north, and that respect's not quite there yet.
Yeah. And NASCAR didn't they didn't like fighting or pushing and shoving back then as much as they do now. Now I think they embrace that extra coverage they get over those things. But back then, they were not very impressed.
All right, push and shove. And the other one, we see this highlight. You don't get to look. We see this highlight 1,000 times a year. You and Kevin Harvick at Bristol. Now, my favorite part of this highlight is Patrick Rogers, who's a bigwig at NASCAR now, literally crawling out of the bottom of the scrum to get away from it. So I hope you weren't hoping for any backup. But what happens with you and Kevin Harvick that day at Bristol?
Well, you set this up perfectly. And here's why. Because the incident with Jay Sauter, they took 100 points from me and fined me $15,000. So fast forward to the next year, and I'm in the championship hunt again, and here comes Kevin Harvick, and I'd made up my mind at that time. NASCAR made it clear that we weren't fighting, and so I said, I'm not fighting. Hands down to my side, doesn't matter. And so here comes Kevin running down the wall and jumped down in front of me. And I think Kevin was in the same boat as we understood. NASCAR made it very clear to us that we're not fighting. And so you don't know how bad I wanted to send him home with a uppercut when he was flying down in there, because I could see him clear as day. But I said, I can't do that. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not fighting, because I won the championship that year. And if I'd have got 100 points taken away for punching him, I would have not won the championship that year. So I think I made a good decision.
Restraint.
And but it does make the highlight reel of him running down the wall and across the top of the car. So it does make a good point. Kevin and I laugh about it, and we talk about it a lot these days. But that's the things that make memories.
And another memory I have is, and maybe this wasn't a good decision on your part, but I can remember this as clear as day. I think I have nightmares about it. At Watkins Glen, I remember looking up and watching Boris Said. He still has his helmet on. He's huge, and he's coming. I think he's going to kill you. And and I think you might have provoked that a little bit too. So that might have been a bad decision. He's a big dude, man.
Yeah, he is a big dude, and it's funny because Boris and I now get along well, but I will say what happened in that particular instance is we had a little brush on the track, nothing major, but he wrecked David Reagan bad on the final lap for last place.
Yeah.
Turns him head on into the fence. He hits the tire barrier, flips upside down, goes over, hits the other tire barrier. I don't even know if the guy's alive, but for no reason whatsoever, none. And it made me absolutely furious that these part-time guys are coming in and doing shit like that means nothing. It means nothing for the position. And so I was furious about it. So I told him he was number one on the way back to the garage, and I pull into the trailer, and I'm a little bit heated, and he pulls up behind my car, and I get out of the car, and I'm having a bottle of water. He pulls up right behind my car, and so I smoked the full bottle of water over there, and connected with it, let's say, and then I went over and proceeded to talk to him in the car, and anyway, we had our differences there, and then fortunately my guys came up and grabbed a hold of me and said, enough, the race is over, and carried my jackman carried me back over there, and then of course Boris got out of the car,
He's a big dude.
Absolutely.
And he never showed up at your house, right?
No.
He was one of the best quotes in NASCAR post-race history. You got to give him that.
Yes.
No doubt. All right, we are done for the day. Kevin Woods, always a pleasure to hang out. Greg Biffle, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
There he is, the great Greg Biffle. He was a driver here at Rous, a legend in the sport, and a great Samaritan, as we found out all about today. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the championship this weekend. It is Backstretch Banter with RFK.